Hey friends, today I'm going to be talking about being intentional and interesting. When I think about the kind of woman I want to be, one of the attributes or characteristics I think of is being interesting. And the things that I'm going to talk about apply to women in general. But I do think in particular, moms can often struggle and find it easy to feel like they don't have the capacities for anything else. Or as a mom, maybe it seems frivolous or wrong to pursue interests outside of mothering and homemaking because it's not your primary responsibility. And so here I'm not really advocating for pursuing anything big or some sort of side hustle, something large like that outside the home. I'm just communicating some simple ways that I do to add more dimension to my life, especially as a mom with little children. And this could be helpful to you if sometimes you maybe fall into the rut or feeling like you're just quote unquote a mom. And when I say, the pursuit of being interesting and being intentional about that, I'm not talking about it in some kind of like just doing it arbitrarily or in some leisurely manner or some kind of prideful pursuit. But for me personally, I want to pursue and a rich, fulfilling life. I want to have rich relationships, rich interactions. And ultimately, I want to pursue and exercise the potential that God has made me with my unique personality and interests, which ultimately developing those things, growing as a woman, growing as an individual, being more who God has created me to be, in just, yeah, the intentionality of life and having like seeking out richness in my life. That's ultimately just going to bless my family. As our family grows and as our children get older, I want to be able to navigate and contribute to different topics of conversation and have varied skills to assess them with different things. And so that's kind of what I mean in the investment in myself and pursuing being a more interesting person, having interests, having these different things I'm going to talk about, ultimately being a gift to my family and a blessing to my family. When I think of the Proverbs 31 woman, I just think of a woman who lives every day with a zeal and a richness that I want to emulate in my own life. And I think, especially as a mom who's at home doing the same thing often and get caught up in just like the routine of life, it can sometimes feel one dimensional. Like the only thing you can think about are the newest like instant pot recipes you discovered or something like that. And maybe this hopefully is also just like an encouragement for a mom, but also maybe the woman who feels like motherhood is kind of dry and boring. And the notion of becoming a mom makes you feel a little bit hesitant or uncertain. Maybe you have encountered a lot of women in motherhood who kind of feel like, oh, is this all there is? And life is kind of bland and boring for them. And I think sometimes there's a belief that motherhood kind of sucks your personality dry, which, to be fair, I don't necessarily think that's a completely unreasonable perception nor an unrealistic fear. I think there definitely are women, and I'm sure it's not an uncommon thing to encounter a mom who's kind of like lost herself in motherhood and kind of her whole life is centered around her domestic duties and homemaking and things like that. And maybe your interactions with her kind of feel, yeah, like one dimensional, like there isn't a lot more she kind of is interested in or pursues in. And that's all she kind of lives and breathes, which I wouldn't say is necessarily a bad thing, but I can see how a woman who maybe who has a lot of interests, who has a lot of hobbies, who has quote unquote like dreams that she wants to pursue. And then she like encounters a mom who doesn't seem to like love her life, it can be a little bit of a turnoff to the notion of wanting to enter into the beautiful vocation that is actually truly full of life and joy. And it can be easy then, therefore, for a woman if who feels maybe dissatisfied in her role as mother or in her life, and for that single woman to perceive like to have that notion in their head to think that something outside of the home would make them feel and become more alive. But I really believe with intentionality and discipline that you don't have to go far at all to bring a lot of joy, a lot of life, a lot of depth, um, and richness to your life without really doing anything crazy dramatic or drastic or starting some kind of venture. And I'm not gonna be talking about that notion in particular, like, working moms and moms pursuing dreams and things like that. That's a good topic, I think, for another time. But today I'm just gonna strictly talk about what I do personally to pursue a rich and enjoyable life as a stay-at-home mom with littles, who loves being a mom, who loves to grow and develop herself, and just as a woman who's striving to live a purpose-filled life. So I'm gonna jump right in. I'm not gonna be saying these in any particular order, but the first one is kinda obvious. I think you hear it a lot, but just dabbling in different hobbies, like doing new things and having different interests. Like, for me, I think I'm naturally a pretty creative person, or, like, I'm inclined to creative things. I really enjoy singing. I have since I've been really little. I sew my own dresses. I dabble in lots of different kind of art things like painting or watercoloring, sketching. I know enough guitar to sing and play like enough songs that I would enjoy singing with some level of proficiency. I see cooking as a fun interest and hobby. I enjoy that. I have some knowledge and or experience in gardening because my husband is a businessman. I definitely dabble in business philosophies and stuff like that. And as my boys are getting older, I'm excited to dabble in things like whittling or more athletic type stuff like archery or jujitsu or something like that, whatever our kids end up getting into. I suppose like the underlying thing here is that, the pursuit of these kinds of skills or hobbies are life giving, and they're ultimately meant to serve my family. Like, the reason why I think it's really good to like know music and to um, have some knowledge about art or woodworking or all of those things is because I'm very aware that my children are going to have multidimensional personalities and interests. And I want to be able to kind of be comfortable with just like the notion of jumping into something that I'm not really familiar about, getting into it, being excited about the process of learning something new and doing that alongside them and finding it, to be enjoyable, or, not being afraid of being uncomfortable or in a spot that I'm unfamiliar with. And for me, I think it's really good. I think it's really good for a mom to within in obviously with a good discernment of just like what, where to spend her time with. But like I think it's a really good thing, right? To have interest, to have things that bring you joy and bring you life, that life and joy that you get from those things you bring into your family. And it's a blessing and a gift to them. Because I think the richer, a person is, in a sense, the more wealth there is to go around. As well, I think a part of taking up hobbies is just being okay with being humble and uncomfortable, and yeah, taking yourself out of your comfort zone where, you might have no background in sketching. You might think that what you produce initially, your own children could produce, which for me, that's what sketching was for me. I decided, hey, I want to take up sketching. I wanted to, yeah, just like kind of take up a different hobby. I wanted something that was kind of mobile, like I could take with me, something that I thought was just neat to do. And I first started drawing an eyeball, and I thought, I can't even tell what this thing is. I'm sure my I'm sure my 4-year-old could do just as good of a job as me. But that didn't, not to let that discourage you and just be like, oh, that's part of the process, and like, hey, that's fun. And eventually I could eventually draw something that is recognizably an eye. So I don't know, just things like that. Like sometimes I think there's like a fear or resistance to kind of like take up something because you're kind of embarrassed if you're not going to be good at it, or you don't like the notion of having to learn something, and like it's always such a big process. But just like not to be over dramatic about it and see it like as a good thing to like to challenge yourself in that manner. I do think, yeah, when it comes to hobbies, you do have to be creative with utilizing your time well, because I think that's the thing. I don't think necessarily people are like, oh, I'm against hobbies. I mean, some people might not love the idea, or, might find it kind of a frivolous idea. But I think sometimes more the issue is, yeah, okay, hobbies are great. Yeah, sure, I'd love to do, do some sort of creative hobby. But it's like, okay, like, how do I find the time? Where do I find the time? I'm sure in certain seasons, and maybe if you're nursing, and there's different kinds of kind of where you are in your life. whatever season that you're in within that, it can be really hard and difficult to find pockets of time to do stuff. But I think just to, reflect on how, like, kind of how to be smart about it, how to be creative about it, being realistic about your season of life, right? Like, if you think that, hey, yeah, being like investing in a hobby is a good idea, but you have a lot of littles running around, it's like, it's probably not the best. Like, don't pick painting where you have to like set up an easel and or you don't have the room for that kind of, that kind of hobby. Like, you don't want your kids to get into the paint and whatever. It's like, pick something that makes sense for this stage of life that you're in. That's kind of why I picked sketching. It's like I wanted something that I could pick up and go. It was easy to tuck away, and that if my kids got into it, it's just a piece of paper and, pencil, and it's not anything to freak out about if they ruined it for whatever reason. So one, just being kind of smart about or creative about what hobby or thing you're investing your time in, talking about it with your spouse and figuring out like, okay, are like there pockets of time that like, and because both of you need it, like both of it's good to have these kinds of like outlets and things that you guys do, and like having a conversation of, yeah, maybe it's not feasible, like, for you to do 2 hours on the weekend or large chunks of time, but is there ways that you can creatively figure out, smaller pockets of time in the week that maybe you guys could like trade off and give towards doing something kind of fun like that for yourself and for your spouse too. So I think there is something to say about, okay, yeah, like maybe you don't actually have time, depending on your season. But sometimes I think we do actually have a lot of time in our day. We just don't use it well, and we don't discipline ourselves to use it well. Like, if you were to add up the amount of times you maybe check your phone or respond to messages or scroll on social media in a day, like if you were to cumulatively add all of those minutes up, I'm sure you could get at least 15 minutes, from that, if not more. If you sit down 4 or 5 times a day and scroll on your phone for 5 minutes, yeah, like that already there is 20, 25 minutes there that you could have spent doing something else, doing something that is actually going to be truly life-giving, that's worth spending your time on. And so if you feel like, oh, I don't have time, like if that's one of your immediate responses, to kind of like reevaluate and actually do like an honest reflection on your life and your day and be like, okay, am I actually using my time well? Are there actually pockets of time that I could be utilizing to do something meaningful and good with that? And I'm actually just squandering it and doing something that's wasteful and not really meaningful. Like for me, my iPhone, like I have an iPhone, but it doesn't have Safari on it, doesn't have the internet on it, doesn't have email. And so there's nothing really to do on my phone. I have a daily Bible verse app. I have the catechism and the Bible on it, a Bible app on it. If, I just so happen to be on my phone, if I want to search up a scripture verse, like something like that. But there's not really anything to do on my phone. And even when it comes to like messaging people or calling people, like I just don't do a lot of it. And I have set times in the day that I've planned where I will get back to people or respond to certain messages. But in a sense, like my day is, yes, I'm taking care of the kids. Yes, I'm making meals and things like that. But there are a lot of pockets. Like there are a lot of lulls, a few minutes here and there throughout the day that I could utilize to sit down and maybe sketch a little bit or read something beautiful and good. Maybe it's not a hobby, but just like filling your day with something meaningful. I think there are actually a lot more opportunities for those things than maybe we realize if we were to actually reevaluate how we spend our time in a day. The next thing is dabbling in different topics, having thoughts, things you care about, things you're passionate about, and thoughts about like real things. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be opinionated, but that, you take the time to learn things that maybe aren't necessarily in your immediate scope of interest or something that's like you don't necessarily have to think about, like something outside of motherhood and child rearing. And obviously, I'm not saying to like seek out unnecessary knowledge for large chunks of time or anything like that, but like at least for me, like once a week or so, I'll open up a couple of like Catholic news websites and things like that, and just kind of like peruse the headlines and be like, okay, like what's going on in the church, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the pro-life movement, like just different things like that. That one, I think there's a level of goodness to know and like kind of a semi-responsibility to be aware of what's kind of going on in the world around you within reason, and then also just gives like good food for thought, filling your mind with maybe like just things to think about, thinking about this like certain headline and like, just like kind of taking time to be thoughtful about those things. If a certain topic comes up that I don't know a lot about, I also definitely don't like to kind of like claim or stamp or have an opinion on things if I don't really know much about the topic, I think it's good to, like, at least have, like, a broad stroke maybe of knowledge about different topics and different things. You don't even have to go, like, that far out in terms of your scope of interest. Like, the church talks about every aspect of life: finances, government policies, pornography, marital dynamics, church history, like Protestantism. Literally, there's anything in life that you encounter, pretty much the church has something to say about it. There's some encyclical, there's some papal writing, there's some saint, like some saint quote or some saint writing on that thing. I just think there's like such a wealth of knowledge out there that can be gleaned from the church that you can apply to your life and kind of like seek out. Because like if you are potentially like scrolling on social media, that is all knowledge. Whatever you're consuming when you scroll, that becomes something that comes into your brain. And like I just for me, it's I think of how often there are times where like I've spent 5 minutes, looking at something, and even maybe it is a good thing, I suppose, like recipes or something like that. And it's like, okay, this didn't really add to my life. Like I didn't really need to spend my time doing this. Like this was kind of a waste of time. But to spend time at least consuming things that are worth thinking about, that might actually come up in conversation when you go to a next social event or gathering, or when you're talking to people after church, and that you have kind of like these things you're thinking about. Or if you're just with somebody and you hit a lull in conversation and you've actually been thinking about some meaningful things throughout the week, and you say like, hey, what do you think about this thing? And then offering nuggets of little things, little tidbits, just like being a thoughtful person, having things that being interested, like truly being interested in other things. As my children get older, I want to be able to converse about everything and anything that they're bringing into the house, something they maybe saw, something they're wondering about. Like, I don't really want anything to be off limits, especially when it comes to the challenging stuff or maybe the more uncomfortable things to talk about, or even the things that maybe they observe that we're doing in our family and they have heard something else and they feel kind of convicted about it, and there's a challenging there. Yeah, I want to get into that. Like, I don't want to kind of be this sort of mom who feels like I figured it out, or I'm satisfied with what I know, and I don't want to be challenged any further than that. And I don't want to go out and seek knowledge and go look for answers and change the way that I think about something because this is how I've decided to think about it, or something like that. I want it to be like we're able to have, discussions about stuff, and that if I don't know the answer to something, I've at least maybe have some sort of vague knowledge of where to look for it. Where in the catechism, where could I find them talking about this certain thing, or what encyclical talks about work or contraception or prayer, or just like the vocation of youth, like all of these like beautiful, rich topics that we could be filling our minds with. And like to be interested in those things is a good thing. Develop some sort of thoughts about those things, and be able to have a good conversation about it. It's good for marriage. You wonder what to talk about with your spouse sometimes. It's like you can talk about anything. You can talk about everything. You can talk about beautiful and good things together. You should be talking about these kinds of things, especially in family life, that you're probably going to have those conversations at some point. And so already start at least kind of creating the foundation of what you believe and what you think together as a couple, and hearing your thoughts, like each other's takes on different things. Because yes, you obviously married this person and you love them and you know a lot about them. But sometimes if you're just not asked a question, you don't even think to talk about it, but you don't might not even know what you think about it. And I'm sure people who have been married for many, many years will still will attest to the fact that there's so much to learn about your spouse. Like, they're a whole other world to explore and venture. And even after years and years of being married to a person, you always can learn something new about them. I think that's a universal truth. The next thing is to ask and learn to ask good questions. Now, I'm not perfect at this, but I definitely do prep myself and think about, like, and Lincoln and I do this a lot, like when we're about to, if he's going to go out and hang out with a friend, or we're about to go into a social situation, to be like, you have any good questions you gonna ask today? Or do you have any good thoughts? Or what's happened in these people's lives recently that we can ask them about? Like just giving a couple of a minute to even think about that, I think goes a long way. So that when you're in the midst of with this person, you can actually think about like, hey, tell me about how did this thing go? What's your journey been on this thing lately? Or from the last time I talked to you, this was kind of what was happening with this, family member. How's that going now? Like, what did you learn from that? Different dynamics. Because one, you don't learn much when you're the one kind of babbling your head off. And usually that's kind of just how you learn stuff. Like, especially if you haven't experienced something yourself, one of the best ways to learn about something or experience something is through the lens of another person. I mean, that's what empathy is. And I think very often, like when we're in conversation with other people or we're in social situations, it's like kind of easy for it to just kind of stay on this surface level or just kind of it be the kind of conversation that is more of a, oh, this is what's happened or this is what's been going on with so and so lately and this is the newest thing. Like it's all just news, but you don't leave the conversation one learning anything really new that's meaningful, and two, you didn't really learn anything about the person you're talking with. And part of that is being genuinely interested in other people. It's easy to ask questions when you genuinely are interested in knowing the answer versus kind of this robotic way of maybe thinking about it where it's like, what question should I ask? I will ask question A, B, or C. But if you just genuinely want to know how somebody is, what they've learned, and what they've been going through, well, yeah, it's a lot easier to ask questions and to have a fruitful conversation. And alongside that, the next thing I would say is just being vulnerable. The reality is that vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And when you're willing to put yourself out there, you invite another person to share your thoughts, to share their thoughts and feelings and like the things that they're going through. People talk about, oh, being careful of being like overly vulnerable and all that stuff. And I'm sure there is a case for that. I do believe that that's true. But I think most people actually struggle with not being very vulnerable, and not necessarily in a way where you're like bearing your heart and soul to somebody necessarily. Like, I'm not even talking about that level of vulnerability, but just even saying things about, yeah, like this is kind of how it made me feel, or yeah, this is just something that I took out of that. Like, just being willing to kind of divulge more than just something kind of surface leveled or a report of an event. You have to be willing to like put yourself out there, put your thoughts out there. Okay, one, you have to have thoughts. So if you don't have thought, that's already you're already running into an issue if you don't have thoughts about things or things you didn't like. You don't have takeaways from stuff. And then two, be willing to share your thoughts and opinions or reflections from something, putting yourself out there and being willing to receive criticism. I mean, sometimes we as people can improve on not being of the opinion that like something that everybody says is like up for discussion, in the sense that, we have to have an opinion about it, or we have to vocalize if we like disagree or not disagree or push back or whatever. But just like to kind of take on a posture of being willing to listen to, and I'm talking about just like when you're in conversation with somebody, but just like being willing to listen. Oh, okay, like if somebody says something that maybe you don't like fully agree with, to even actually like, even if and if you want to go in that direction in a conversation, to like just be tactful about how you would go about maybe disagreeing about it, or like flushing the topic out. Not in a manner where it makes another person feel defensive, but like gives you more insight onto how they think. Because again, like maybe you misunderstood or maybe you don't really get what they're saying. And so to learn to ask like open-ended questions, questions that give people the ability to share vulnerably, to share openly, and to go beyond the surface level of just current news. The next thing is just like having a sense of humor and having a sense of joy. Life is so rich and full of so many exciting things when you're willing to just like have fun, so to speak, like have fun and enjoy life and take life in or approach life and your daily duties in kind of like a lighthearted manner, to not be like dragging your feet about stuff, to be the joyful person going grocery shopping, sitting in the waiting room, seeing like all these kind of like basic things, but like seeing the good in things, enjoying the simple things. Like those are the things that really do just like bring richness and depth to life. It makes life more interesting. And I think it's true that when you're doing really just basic stuff with somebody who's joyful, or somebody who's not kind of like being a drag about it, but just like kind of has a hop in their step, is like loves life, is kind of like excited about life. The really like mundane, basic things become really exciting, so to speak. Like they don't feel meaningless and mundane and ordinary even. They feel rich and good and beautiful and purpose filled. And so sometimes even just like that attitude in and of itself, seeing your life and taking your life on as if it's a beautiful and interesting venture, just naturally breathes a greater richness and depth to life, because that is what God has blessed us with. Our lives are such a gift. My life feels really rich and full with just the simple things that I'm doing. And I think that's just like an attitude. I think that's an attitude. I think it's a heart posture that maybe we need to, yeah, challenge ourselves to take on more if maybe we don't feel like that or see that about our own lives. And the final thing here with just pursuing intentionality or being more interesting, things like that. The last thing I want to talk about is just setting goals and casting a grander vision for yourself. So what's that to say is like, yeah, like the larger picture is like, for example, you know, we all talk about or we hear like, oh, I want to be a saint. I want to be a saint. And that's beautiful. That's a great goal. That's the large, grander vision goal. But taking that apart and being like, okay, setting goals from that, how am I going to break down this in a sense, like kind of vague or a large goal and break it down into smaller pieces in a concrete manner where pursuing that larger vision goal, becoming a saint, for example, feels like a really rich mission that you're going on. Like break it down, like truly break it down. It's like, what kind of prayers do you want to say? Or how many times do you want to pray? What kinds of things do you want to read? What kind of saints do you want to learn about? In what areas of your life do you feel like you're not very strong? What kind of like in terms of like your catechesis do you need brushing up on? Just like being intentional about pursuing that larger vision goal in a real concrete manner, that it does feel like a grand vision that you are chasing after versus some sort of kind of like vague thing, that you kind of want to be one day, if that makes sense. And so with that, just to kind of like wrap up here, these are the kinds of examples I'm giving to kind of communicate that like you don't have to kind of go very far in your home, and if maybe you feel like maybe you need to take on a larger venture to like feel alive, that like that's not necessarily true. That the way that you approach just your daily life and like kind of like these little things bring so much dimension, so much richness to your life, and you don't have to go far at all. And so these are just kind of like ideas, simple ideas really, that anybody can implement at any point in their life immediately tomorrow, to pursue, yeah, being more intentional and truly just like living the kind of life that God is calling you to. Anyways, I hope that was something kind of reflective and fun and good to chew on. Maybe give you some encouragement or ideas to take into your own life, into motherhood, and to, yeah, approach it all in excitement, and to pursue just more intentionality in your life in general. Thanks again for joining me this week. I'll see you next time.